So, what we've come to talk about this afternoon is incredibly simple. There is no self. There you go, 4 words and we've said it, we've summed it up. Now, I don't know what else we might talk about this afternoon. We might talk about some stuff that's quite complicated. I have no idea. We may talk about some philosophical stuff, some psychological stuff, some therapeutic stuff, who knows? But in a way, that's just something to fill in the time between the tea breaks and the biscuits. The essence is so simple. There is no self. And then all sorts of implications of that statement may begin to occur to us quite naturally. There is no self. Well, if there is no self, and there is no self, then everything that we believe that belongs to the self is also, in a way, non-existent. I say in a way non-existent because although there is no self, there's a kind of dream or a kind of sensation for many people that there is a self. So we could say that everything that seems to belong to the self is unreal. And yet, if it seems like there's a self, then it seems like all the stuff that belongs to the self is real. So a self, for example, lives in time. A self seems to have been born at some specific time in the past. And it seems that a self will die at some specific point in the future. So at the very least we could say a self seems to live in time and a self seems to be on a trajectory, on a journey. It could be any kind of journey, but at least a journey from birth to death that passes through time. And a self seems to live in a world of cause and effect. Things happen because of previous things that have happened. It's extremely likely, although not inevitable, that a self will also live in a world of meaning. That a self will, if you like, ascribe to itself a story, or perhaps it will buy a story, more likely it will buy a story that's already existing. So at least I like that story, I believe in that story. That story gives me something called meaning and purpose. So something else that a self has, which can be extremely powerful, is a sense that there is a meaning and there is a person. We are here for a purpose, for a reason. There are several things wrong with that sentence. Firstly, there is no we. Secondly, there is no here. And thirdly, there is no purpose. So all you're left from that sentence is a few conjunctions, maybe. We're meaning-seeking beings. We're purpose-seeking beings. The one who feels separate, and that's what it means to be a person. To be a person means to feel separate, right? To live in a world which I see as this and that. Okay, there's this, the person who experiences the world, and there's that, the world in which this moves and which this experiences. That separation. At its simplest, that is what separation is. Simply the feeling that there is this here, a person who moves through that there, an external world. And in that situation, it is not quite inevitable, but almost inevitable, that we will look for stories which imply a meaning and a purpose. You know, we are meaning-seeking animals. I mean, if we wanted to become Darwinian about this, if we wanted to become evolutionary about this, probably there is some great survival purpose in looking for patterns and looking for meanings. First we look for patterns, and there's a very obvious survival purpose in that. Yeah, you see a shape, you see the bulrushes move in a certain way, you don't recognise a pattern from the previous time that happened, or you don't recognise a pattern that your parents have taught you about. Simple, you get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. You see the pattern, you go, oh, that pattern might be a tiger moving through the grasses on the savannah, you survive. So on the most basic, simple level, you know, we could say we are pattern noticing beings. It's a simple survival technique. It pays us to over-notice patterns. In other words, it pays us to see patterns where there are none. Right? As long as we see the patterns that there really are, we don't get eaten by the tiger. It doesn't matter how many additional patterns that we see that aren't really there, we still don't get eaten by the tiger. This, you could say, is how superstitions begin to arise. You know, we see patterns that aren't really there. Yeah? Evolution. Can I bang on about this for a bit longer, just because it interests me? Evolutionary theorists talk about trivial and non-trivial mistakes. Right, a trivial mistake is one that if you make it, it has no serious consequences. A non-trivial mistake is one that if you make it, you probably die. It should be obvious that in survival terms, it doesn't matter how many non-trivial mistakes we make, because we go on surviving. We make how many trivial mistakes we make, because we go on surviving. If we make one non-trivial mistake, we probably die. So we have a very, very strong predisposition for making lots and lots of trivial mistakes, but not for making non-trivial mistakes. Go back to our tiger. I promise you that at this moment I have a strong belief that this will lead somewhere relevant. So just kind of play along with it for now. I might be wrong about that, but at the moment I've got a strong feeling this may go somewhere relevant, right? So go back to those patterns of grasses, those grasses moving in the savannah, right? If it's the wind, but we see a pattern there, if it's random wind, but we see a pattern of a tiger, that's a trivial mistake. It has no serious consequences. We think it's a tiger and we run away. It wasn't really a tiger, but all that happened was we just ran away. But if we make the mistake the other way round, if we see the grasses moving and we think it's the wind, when it's actually a tiger, that's a non-trivial mistake, and the results of that is we get eaten and we don't get to pass our genes down the genetic pool. This is how an evolutionist would see it anyway, you see. What on earth has this got to do with what we've come to talk about this afternoon, non-duality? Well, just that simple thing, you know, that we are predisposed to see patterns everywhere, whether they're there or not. And out of that, there comes a predisposition then to look for meanings. You see, I'm watching the grass grow, waving, I'm already looking for a meaning. Yeah? Is that the wind, random wind, or is it a tiger that could be threatening? So we're we're predisposed to look for patterns, meanings, and then build them up into stories. And the stories give us a purpose. And here we are, you know, a few generations separated from the savannah, maybe, and we have this almost inescapable inbuilt pattern to think, you know, there is a meaning, there's a trajectory, there's a purpose, there's a journey. I'm not even going to start going into the various meanings and purposes that are commonly held by people. They're kind of too obvious to go into. But all the religious stories, all the spiritual stories, all the psychological, all the philosophical stories that suggest that we are going somewhere. We aren't going somewhere because there is no we. And we are going somewhere kind of implies we are going somewhere else, somewhere other than this. And there is no other than this. There is no somewhere else which is other than this. I may feel I'm on, it could be any kind of journey. I might be working through my issues about my parents through psychotherapy every week, or I might be following a spiritual teacher and having my chakras cleared once every 2 weeks, or endless other possible stories, all of them based on this very, very, very powerful feeling, sensation, idea. It's more than an idea, it's more than a feeling, it's all of those things, that there is somewhere that I can get to tomorrow, next week, next year, in 5 years' time, maybe when I finally had that last chakric block cleared and my Sahasrara chakra can open. But looking at the state of myself now, I can't really expect that to happen in less than 5 years' time. So I'm on a trajectory to this point in the future where the culmination of my story, of my meaning, of my purpose will finally be fulfilled. And then I will be living in paradise. But guess what? This is already paradise. This is the only paradise that there is. And I'm sorry if you're sitting there going, well, if this is paradise, it's not good enough. I'm not satisfied. I want my money back. I'm sorry. It's one of the deepest ironies of our lives. It's kind of tragic and comic at the same time. You know, this is a tragicomedy. There is no doubt whatsoever that the life of the one who feels himself to be separate is a tragicomedy. It's both. But it's one of the deepest ironies of our lives. We spend our life looking for paradise in some form or other. I mean, clearly I'm using the word paradise in a very wide way. It could be a very different kind of paradise for different individuals, but we spend our lives, so many of us spend our lives looking for paradise. The essential message which is going on inside us, of course, is this isn't it. You know, that, if you like, at a very core level, is the essential message that rules so many of our lives so much of the time. This isn't it. This isn't good enough. This isn't paradise, whatever the paradise is that I'm seeking for. Sometime in the future, maybe this will be good enough. This will be paradise. This will be what I'm looking for. This will be what I'm craving. It's a tragedy and it's a comedy. But for so many of us, this is the experience of life. And all the time, this is the paradise. This is the only possible paradise that we're seeking for. This is already what we're seeking. The reason we can't see this is because we're looking for it somewhere else. And we can never find it somewhere else because there isn't anywhere else. And the minds of many of us can assent to that. Yeah? The minds of many of us can assent to that. Yes, of course, this is it. Of course, there's nothing else other than this. And yet something in us keeps running, some energy keeps running that goes, even though there's a mental assent to that, it's not God. It's not really understood in here. And so the searching goes on. It's like searching has its own energy. You could say separation has its own energy. And searching has its own energy, and those two energies run together. The one who feels themselves separate, that's not a thought. I said the one who feels themselves separate, it's not a thought, it's an energy, it's an energetic state to feel separate. And the one who is seeking, that's also not a thought. It may involve lots of thoughts, but the one who is seeking, that's also an energy. The energy of seeking and the energy of separation go together. And when they collapse, they tend to collapse together. Now, there are absolutely no rules about this, no rules whatsoever, but nonetheless there are tendencies, and one of the tendencies you may have come across is reports from individuals where the self has suddenly collapsed and it's followed by a lot of laughter. It doesn't always happen, but it happens often enough for it to be worth commenting on or noticing, maybe. There's often some laughter, and sometimes a lot of laughter, if the sense of self suddenly and completely collapses. Now, that laughter may be about all sorts of things. It's not necessarily just about one thing. But one of the things I strongly suspect it is about in a lot of cases is that it just suddenly is seen as such a joke. It's such a joke that which I have been seeking for, what I've been seeking for perhaps 40 or 50 or years or longer, was always what I was. It was always what I was. I was always that which I was seeking for. Now, it's equally likely that might cause a collapse into tears and despair. That could also happen, but often it causes laughter because it is such a joke. I mean, individually, we're all different, our life's trajectories are different, but if some of our life trajectories are somewhat similar, so if my life trajectory was that of a spiritual seeker, if I decided that paradise could only be gained by clearing my chakras and by following a guru and by living in an ashram in the Himalayas, or by going and paying 5,000 euros regularly to have Diksha, maybe. Or perhaps to go to a little tiny ashram somewhere near Rishikesh and eat brown rice and have diarrhea. And feel that actually this is the very special ashram because it's so small, so few people know about it. Or maybe I'm in Pune with Osho and I think this is a really special ashram because it's so large. It's attracted so many people, so Osho must have such a vast spiritual presence. Whatever. If that's the kind of trajectory that my life has been on, and then there's a sudden falling away of the sense of self, a sudden seeing that this and this not only are the same thing, but always were the same thing because there is no time anyway, it's quite possible that there might be a lot of laughter at that point.
But when I am caught in the illusion, there is no way I can go out of that.
Of course not.
I mean,
No.
if I am doing that, I have to go on doing
Of
that
course.
because I cannot decide, now I got it, now I decide now I am enlightened. It's
Yeah.
not going happening like that.
Of course. And you see, even the statement, when I am caught in the illusion, is in a way a statement of separation. There's me, and I'm caught in this illusion. That's not actually what's happening. What's happening simply is, we could reframe that. You say, when you're caught in the illusion. We say, well, when illusioning is happening.
Yes,
When illusioning is happening, it's happening.
Okay.
And we could, by the way, we could refrain any personal activity in that same way. If we did, it will probably drive us mad by the end of the afternoon because of the torturing of language. But in a way, it's a more accurate way of speaking. Now, speaking more accurately doesn't get us anywhere closer to where we think we want to be, but actually already are. Yeah? But in a way, it kind of makes what you just said more obvious. You know, when illusioning that I'm separate is happening, then illusioning that I'm separate is happening. Of course, you can't do anything about that because there is no separate you. Of course. It's like this. I think last night I started by saying something like, there is just this. There is just this. And this consists of whatever phenomena arising. What do I mean by this? Whatever's happening. If I say whatever's going through awareness, I've already begun to bring in separation, the idea that there's awareness and something going through it. So let's not say that. Let's just say there is, whatever is happening. And what is happening will be, well, we're all phenomenologists. It will be phenomena. What's happening are phenomena. Thoughts are happening. Sounds are, there's the hearing of sound. There's the thinking of thoughts. There isn't really the thinking of thoughts, there's thinking. There isn't really the hearing of sounds, there's hearing. There's moving. There's seeing. There's colouring. There's sensationing. There's pressure of seat on bum. That's what I mean by there is just this. Now, what so often happens is that added to all of that is another sensation, a very, very powerful sensation and a highly addictive sensation, that all of that stuff that I've just talked about is happening for someone. Again, you see, that's separation. You see, non-separation, hearing is happening. Separation, I am hearing. There is a separate I for whom the hearing is happening. In a way, again, it really is that simple. There is whatever's happening. What does that mean? Well, in this waking state, it means phenomena are happening. Phenomena are always happening, except in dreamless sleep. So in dream sleep and in this waking state, phenomena are happening. One of the phenomena that is happening is the phenomenon of feeling that all the rest of the phenomena are happening for a person. That's separation. It's as simple as that. But the feeling that all of the stuff that's going on is happening for a person is in itself just another phenomenon. It has no more importance and no less importance than the sound of the voice, the sensation of the colour of the jumper, the sensation of pressure on the foot, on the floor. It has no more importance than any of those, but it seems to, because it seems to be the centre from which all of those other phenomena are experienced. So you could say maybe in 30 seconds, let's say, for example, 15 different phenomena are experienced, but one of those phenomena is that the other 14 are experienced by a person. That's the sense of self. That's, if you like, the kind of simple but inevitable mistake that we make.
So that there is no answer for the question why.
There's never an answer. Well, for any question why, there are as many answers as you like. It's not that there are no answers, there are an infinite number of answers. There's no real answer. Yeah. Yeah, the problem with the why question is it always invites us to make up a story, or to take off the shelf one of the stories that has already been put there. Why am I here? What's my purpose? What does God want of me?
What brings me here?
What brings me here? Yeah. Well, yeah. Why am I here? Yeah, of course. The why question always implies a story, which is always just a story. But going back to what I'm saying, that the sense of self is so addictive, but in a sense it is just another phenomena. It just seems to be the core phenomena that all the other phenomena are experienced through. A metaphor that I like for this, I don't know if it will work, for the sense of self, the sense of the one inside who is controlling the show. It's like if you imagine the sense of self sort of sitting behind a huge and very important desk in an enormous office, right, and in a very lovely leather office chair, sort of the sense of self, the one who controls everything, the one who makes decisions, the one who knows where it's going and is going to get us there, right? And this desk is covered with very important looking levers and very important looking buttons. And the one sitting in the chair keeps leaning forward and pulling a lever or pressing a button. And it seems to the one who's sitting in the chair that these levers and these buttons are controlling things, right? So I pull a lever, something happens out there. I press a button, the button might say sell 100,000 shares in Shell Oil or something, and I push the button and something happens out there, and I go, see, I did that. I am in control here. It's like we all see ourselves as the managing director of our life. So these buttons and these levers control this very, very important thing called my life, and I sit in the chair, right, and I decide, I make decisions, I make choices. I am the cause, and I pull a lever and the effect happens. And when that sense of self collapses, and again this might be another reason why there's sometimes quite a lot of laughter when this happens, when the sense of self collapses, it's suddenly seen that none of those levers and none of those buttons is attached to anything. There are no wires. We've just been pulling levers and pushing buttons. Might as well have been doing it at random. They're not connected to anything. Nothing that we think we ever did was ever caused by us. We were never the cause of anything. Why not? Because we never were. Full stop. We never existed. The non-existent managing director could never cause anything to happen. It's all a glorious illusion.
When you say that, I had this image of a grown-up looking at a child who's playing. And that's what you say, it's just playing, but the grown-up thinks when he does the same, it's different.
Yeah. 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 There was a film made about this some years ago called Who's Driving the Dream Bus? And the title of that film, so again, a wonderful metaphor. You may remember when you were young, perhaps, going to a fun fair and being put on a little coach or a little car or a little railway engine, right, at the age of 3 or 4, and there's a wheel, yeah, and you turn the wheel, and this little car or coach or bus or train is going round and round and round, and you're turning the wheel and it goes left, and you turn the wheel and it goes right. Yeah, well, actually, I have news for you. The owners of that fun fair would have been open to some very serious and very heavy lawsuits if they really had allowed a 4-year-old to drive a train or a bus or a van. The train, of course, the bus, the van, it's on rails. And it goes round a little track and it turns left and it turns right, and at 3 years old we sit in the front of it and we turn the wheel and we think that what we're doing is steering the train or the bus around the track. Actually, of course, what we're doing is having no effect whatsoever. That's a very good metaphor. It's a very good metaphor. We think we're in control of our life. We think we're making all these decisions. But we're not in control of our life because we don't have a life. Why don't we have a life? Because there is no we. There is simply what's happening. There is simply what's happening. And one of the phenomena that arises, one of the many things that are happening, is the feeling that we are separate and we are in control. And meanwhile, this just goes on being this, and whatever arises simply arises. So it turns out that the bus is a dream bus, and there is, of course, no one driving it. But notice, as we were saying a little bit last night, notice that in the nighttime dream, it may equally and absolutely appear that there is a person there who is in control, who is making decisions, who is experiencing the consequences of those decisions, who is experiencing cause and effect. That is very often a very persuasive part of a nighttime dream. We have no difficulty in seeing through that when we wake up in the morning. The moment we wake up in the morning, it's completely obvious that there was no person in the dream, there was no cause and effect in the dream, there were no events in the dream, nothing actually happened. The dream happened as a dream, but nothing actually happened. And that's one of the reasons that one of the words that is so often used for what we're talking about here is awakening. We awaken from a nighttime dream, and we realise that that dream was both real and unreal. It was a real dream, and yet nothing happened. Absolutely nothing happened. When we talk about awakening to this dream, it's not quite the same thing. Awakening to this dream, it's more like the idea of lucid dreaming for a nighttime dream, because in awakening to this dream, there is a waking up to the fact that this too is nothing happening. This is nothing happening. But the dream goes on. When we wake up from a nighttime dream, the dream stops. So in a way, waking up from a nighttime dream is actually an analogy for physical death. But it does quite well as a metaphor for awakening in the sense that we're talking about it here. So in awakening as we're talking about it, the character goes on, the dream goes on, but now there's a realization that this is just a character and this is a dream. A kind of dream. A dream which is both real and unreal.
So
So then what about you brought up the evolution in the first place?
Yeah, I like evolution.
Yeah. So
I mean,
sounds,
it's interesting.
but that sounds like time.
Of course, I know.
So
All I can do is heartily apologise. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in a way, you could say that. I mean, we don't have to do this, but I tend to do this. You know, you could say that we're talking on two levels. You know, and in the dream, in the waking dream, we can say, well, there appears to be evolution.
because well,
I said then I like evolution. The reason, I mean, I find evolution interesting. The reason I like it is because it has a vast amount of explanatory power. I think that's rather nice. But of course, there's just this, of course. And in this, a story about evolution arises. And that story has a lot of explanatory power. And it's still a story.
So when it's not about evolution, but more about personal evolution from, let's say, early childhood to adult age. So because that's something I haven't yet got past. I haven't got, how can I say? When I look at myself or the people surrounding me and I see their personal story, let's say, and like they were their parents and everything, I still there seems to be such a strong logic about all this. Okay, let's say somebody has been very strongly judged in his childhood and treated badly, and then you see them later as they are have kind of strong unease with going on with their lives and feeling small because they have been judged so strong. So that seems so convincing. So is it real? Is it unreal?
Yes.
That was a question.
I've answered your question. It's real and it's unreal.
Okay.
It's a real story. It's a real story. One of the things I haven't said yet, I'll throw it in now, is that I mean, I call this. This is, as far as I'm concerned, this is the ultimate mystic communication. This is the only thing that mystics have to say, which should be of any interest whatsoever to us, is there is no self. You know, there's no separation. This is it. We might add, there is unconditional love. Maybe we better put that aside and talk about that later. Maybe when we've had a chocolate biscuit, perhaps. I don't know. You see? But the point about, I mean, this is the core of the mystical communication, what I've just said. Now, in a way, the mystic is the most ignorant of people, because the mystic really only knows two things. The mystic knows there is no self, there is just this, there's unconditional love. And the other thing they know is that they know almost nothing else. And the reason that the mystic knows that they know almost nothing else is because the mystical insight brings with it the recognition that almost everything is unknowable. Almost everything is unknowable. You could say this is known, right? This is what's known. This is known, isn't it? Yeah, I hope no one's going to disagree with this. If anybody disagrees with this, I'm going to want to know what sort of drugs you took for breakfast. But if nobody's going to disagree, we can move on. This is known. Now I'm going to suggest to you that almost nothing else is known, and almost everything else is not only not known, it's unknowable. And this is what one of the things that the mystic sees. So, you've just given a very convincing story. I have a psychological and a psychotherapeutic background. I too find myself very convinced by the story that what happens in childhood, like, for example, having over-disciplinarian parents, is likely to produce effects in adulthood, perhaps a lack of confidence. Except when it doesn't. except when you have over-disciplinarian parents, and what you get in adulthood is very confident adults, which also happens. You see, so it's a story. Let's call it, and I mean, I don't know if you even meant it, but just for simplicity's sake, let's call that the Freudian story, because there are many, many psychological stories. Let's call that the Freudian story. Is it true? It's unknowable. Is it false? It's unknowable. 400 years ago, if you'd had a badly disciplined child throwing a tantrum, 400, 500, 600, 700 years ago, I should think most of us in this room would have said, well, it's a demon, isn't it? Do you take your unruly child to a psychoanalyst, or do you take your unruly child to an exorcist? There are plenty of people still today who take their unruly child to an exorcist. I don't think that's a very good strategy, but, So they're stories, more or less convincing stories. Which of these stories are correct? None of them. Which of them are nearest to reality? It's unknowable. Have what you like. Have what you find the most convincing. Have what's most amenable to you. It's much, much more amenable to me to have the story of fucked up parents fucking up their children than it is to have the story of demons. Much more amenable. Which is why, I have a past in psychotherapy but not in exorcism. But ultimately it's unknowable. We live in separation, which is a very, very confusing place to live, and we try to make sense of it. Right? When we are no longer living in separation because there is no longer we, when that has been seen through, probably we just don't bother to make sense of it anymore. I mean, not inevitably, but probably, because it's seen that so much is unknowable. I mentioned relaxation last night. Now, if there was a process, it would be relax. There is no process, but if there was a process, it would be relaxation. All right? If there is an effect, so you could say, if there were a cause of seeing liberation, it would be relaxation. There is no cause of seeing liberation, so we can forget that. But if there were, it would be relaxation. If there were an effect of seeing liberation, it would be relaxation. There is no effect of seeing liberation. There is no effect of seeing liberation which we could pin down in any way, but if there were, it would be relaxation. There is nothing that is close to liberation, but if there were, it would be relaxation. I'm putting quite a lot of stress on relaxation here. Now, maybe you might make a link for yourself, right? If what is seen is that almost everything is unknowable, that might bring about some relaxation. Because believing that things are knowable makes us want to know them. And wanting to know something tends to create an awful lot of stress. So it's commonly reported, it's not always reported by any means, but it is commonly reported that when this is seen, there tends to be some increase in relaxation and some increase in laziness. Right. Now that may be for many reasons, but I'm just going to suggest that one of the reasons is, our minds are an amazing mixture of stupidity and intelligence. Our minds which don't exist. I'll just use the word mind for the moment. You can challenge me about it later if you want to. But for the moment, let's pretend there is such a thing as a mind. And that mind is wonderful. It is absolutely wonderful. It is so highly intelligent. It is staggering. It is also so supremely stupid in other ways that is also completely staggering. How can something so intelligent also be so stupid? But, You know, whatever the depths of stupidity of the mind is not completely and utterly and totally stupid. Once the mind really gets that this is unknowable, it tends to go, oh, that's all right then, we can relax now. The mind is constantly trying to understand. Once the mind really gets that understanding is not possible, it tends to go, okay, I give up. And this is why, to some extent, this is why a certain amount at least of relaxation is likely to occur if liberation is seen. Liberation has no consequences. There is nothing whatsoever we can say about liberation as an experience. Liberation is not an experience. Liberation is seeing that which all experience arises from. It's not an experience in itself. Nevertheless, the experience of relaxation is quite often there when liberation is seen. Now, there may be all sorts of reasons for that, but I suggest that one of them is that so many opinions, so many stories, so many truths that we thought we knew about the world fall away into this great abyss of not knowing. There's a famous spiritual work, isn't there, called The Cloud of Unknowing. I haven't read it, so I don't know what it says. A very famous work of Christian mysticism, yeah? Cloud of Unknowing. Well, it's I don't know what it says, but that is a beautiful metaphor, whatever. And seeing liberation is entering into a cloud of unknowing. It's, for another metaphor, it's falling into an abyss of unknowing. But we don't need to worry about falling into the abyss of unknowing, because actually it was somebody, I think in Austria, who wrote to me an email and said the wonderful thing about this abyss is that it doesn't have a bottom. So you don't need to worry about eventually being dashed to pieces like the would-be devotee in our story last night. I mean, one of the stories that might be picked up on a spiritual path, I mean, I don't know, but it's possible, is a story that liberation brings great wisdom, great knowledge, great understanding. No, absolutely not. It's the opposite. Liberation brings great ignorance. It brings the recognition of great ignorance. The wisdom that liberation brings is the wisdom of seeing what is unknowable, that so much is unknowable. And then the mind goes, I can forget about that now. You want an opinion about that? Oh, go and ask somebody else. And then there tends to be a satisfaction, I'll put it no higher than that, a satisfaction in simpler things. Because it's seen that all the complex things are unknowable. I've said this many a time before, I sometimes say, I quite like watching paint dry now. And I said this to a friend and they said, Richard, I like watching paint that's already dried. It's a sort of statement of how simple things can become.
In this seemingly process of awakening, which maybe happened to you, has there occurred any physical phenomena? Or symptoms?
There can occur, if awakening or liberation happens suddenly, which they don't have to, but if they happen suddenly, there can occur an apparent event, what seems to be an event, in which there is an apparent complete disappearance of the physical form, the physical self. So there's just complete emptiness. I mean, I often say that in an awakening event or in a liberation event, there's complete emptiness here. And I don't know whether people hear that as literally as I mean it. There's a complete disappearance of any sense of physicality, physical location, and so forth. Now, I'm not sure whether that's what you're asking about, or whether you're asking about, are there then any kind of consequences for the physical body in terms of seeing awakening?
Both interesting.
Both. Well, the first one I've answered, then that can happen, right? And because we can only describe this in terms of time, I mean, this is, we can only talk about this as a story unfolding in time. We could say that is a temporary phenomenon. It's not a phenomenon that lasts. But yes, there can be a complete disappearance of any sense of centre here whatsoever, including the physical body. In terms of physical effects, well, anything can happen. Absolutely anything can happen. The only general thing I would say is that we are talking with both awakening and liberation. We're talking about an energy shift. And we're not talking about a change in belief or a change in thinking or an emotional change or something like that. We're talking about a kind of total energy shift, which can sometimes be very powerful. Now, in that energy shift, it's likely, although not certain, that all sorts of things that belong to this kind of total energy system may fall away, including, for example, at least a certain amount of neurotic energy. Now, if we follow the story, that neurotic energy is likely to have effects on the physical system, we might then think, well, it's quite likely that then the relaxation, which is brought about because of a loss of a certain amount of neurotic energy, is likely to have an effect on the physical system. But it's not inevitable. Does that kind of get anywhere near your question, or no?
Maybe it's more interesting for me to this flip-flop state. Like sometimes it feels like very wide, or there's no word for that, free or empty, and then it feels very tight and tighter than before.
Yeah.
And
the tighter than before is is in comparison to that opening. Yeah.
And sometimes I have this strange sensations in the brain, like something. It's like electricity or like goosebumps in the brain. It's really it's hard to describe, but it's something that is watched or felt.
And you want to know if that's significant?
I don't know. No, not really.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a little bit worrying.
Yeah.
And becoming more lazy, or like everything feels so irrelevant.
Yes.
It's so.
Oh, that's it. Yeah. I wish the camera could see this. This is such a good demonstration of.
Yeah, but in the next moment it can be like, oh, it's so important, like about the child or the children, caring for the children, or any problem. Then it's everything concentrates there, and then the next moment it's like. It's weird. It's really weird, and a kind of forgetfulness.
Yes.
Like Alzheimer, I don't know.
Yeah. And yet not like Alzheimer's. I bet you can still remember where you live.
Of course.
So not like Alzheimer's.
Yeah, but many things fall away.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Sounds like it's sort of all over.
That's paradise.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is always the only possible paradise. Yeah.
And then there's such a big question mark. I'm starting education now. I'm working therapeutic besides painting, and it really doesn't make any sense to work therapeutic. But I don't know what else to do.
Yeah.
And it's not even me who's doing that.
No.
I mean, it's just happening. This funny education.
Did you say art? Did you say, are you an art therapist?
No.
No.
I paint for my own.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
Like another.
Well, being a therapist will either go on happening, or it won't. But I would suggest that if there's no one there, if being a therapist goes on happening, then what will be manifesting probably will be a better therapist. You know, that might decide, well, it's not worth bothering with, or it might decide to go on. But if it decides to go on, probably there'll be a better therapist there. There's nothing like a person to get in the way of being a good therapist. Because a person has agendas and beliefs and stories and all sorts of stuff they may be trying to kind of impose on the client. I always say that if I ever go to a therapist again, I would like to go to a therapist who isn't there.
We'll see.
We'll see. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's so hard. I cannot take my own stories serious anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
completely-
I'm sorry, you're showing all the kind of many of the defining characteristics of it being all over.
But how can I take the stories of any client serious then? It's like,
Why should you?
Okay, so-
Well, why should you take it seriously? Do you think it would be helpful if you took it seriously? I think it might be quite helpful if you just let the story be whatever it is. I mean, do you feel yourself becoming a worse therapist because of this?
I have no idea. I don't know.
Well, my bet is that you don't. My bet is that probably when the therapist, I mean, a lot of therapy, I don't know what kind of training you did, but if I sort of think about the kind of training I did, and a lot of the psychotherapist training is about the psychotherapist working through their own story so they can get it out of the way. Right? That's kind of obvious. So I'm not sitting here as a psychotherapist and I can't hear your story because I'm interpreting it through mine. Right? Well, so if the psychotherapist collapses as a person and all their stories collapse as a person, that kind of could create the ideal conditions for therapy to take place. Because then there's nothing left there or here that wants to impose an agenda or a set of beliefs or a particular outcome on the client. For me, that's perfect therapy. But for you, what will happen, apparently. But you gave a kind of long list of symptoms there, if you like. Not that there are symptoms, but if there were, you gave a long list of symptoms of it being all over. You know, sometimes there's just the absolute seeing that there's just this, but then when stuff does come up, it can come up really powerfully because it's in an unblinkered way. You know, so he goes from to very, very quickly. Laziness, yes. Amnesia, yes. Alzheimer's, no. So the difference is, I mean, this is reported so often. I like to quote. There's an Australian who's written a book about this. It's a kind of bizarre mixture of non-duality wisdom and hippie anecdotes of sort of driving round the bush in a VW microbus and that sort of thing. But one of the things he says is something I'm paraphrasing, but I'll get it roughly right. Is memory gone, completely fucked. Yep. Very common. Yeah, memory just collapses. But it's not Alzheimer's. What's the difference? Well, the difference is that the functional memory that you require so that you can still get home goes on. With Alzheimer's, that collapses. So we can send you out to the shops to buy a pint of milk and be reasonably confident that you'll come back. Unless you have a good reason for not wanting to come back. If you had Alzheimer's, we'll send you out to the shop for a pint of milk, and then 2 hours later we'll have to send somebody else out to find you.
It's more maybe of remembering stories of what I said 2 days ago.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's so irritating for my husband.
Yeah.
He asks me, what was that? I said, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's long ago.
Yeah.
And the time, the feeling of time is so different.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's long, like chewing gum.
Yeah.
1 week seems like a month, like really long ago. And sometimes it's so short. It's nothing which I can depend on feelingly or feeling-wise anymore. Time. So,
Yeah.
so different.
Yeah, total collapse in the normal sense of time. Yeah, tell your husband if he wants to remember what you say, he should write it down. That'll solve that one. Yeah, this all sounds so familiar. Yeah, this is, because it's like the executive director or the managing director that holds on to all of that stuff and organises it and keeps the diary and runs it and goes, and now there's an appointment. I mean, they've died. And then what it turns out, most of the time, fortunately, is they were always redundant anyway. They were never needed. It turns out that we are quite capable of getting up and getting dressed in the morning and making a cup of tea even though there's no one there. That stuff just carries on.
Or sometimes in conversation I listen what is said and I say, what am I saying? It's I shouldn't say that. It's not smart. It's not.
Yeah.
And he's so irritated again, and then he tries to make me responsible, but
Yeah.
I know I'm not responsible.
You can't take that on, yeah. How very frustrating for him. Yeah. Bad luck. Yeah, this is all typical, what you're describing. It's very typical. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, in what you just said, a part of if you think of that managing director sitting behind the desk, he has many jobs. No wonder he or she gets so tired. One of those jobs is censorship. One of those jobs is oversight. Let's watch what's happening and control it or whatever. Oh, here's a thought coming up. No, better not say that. No, that might upset somebody if I say that, or whatever it might be. So that's another thing that can disappear. When the managing director realises that nothing he's doing has any influence whatsoever. And so that tendency to censor may also collapse. That's okay.
I understand it.
Might get you into trouble.
I understand it different. The button is pushed and it has an effect. But it's not me who pushes the button.
Yeah.
In the Christianity, there's the saying, "Your will is happening." I don't know. You say to God, "Your will is happening."
Yes, Thy will be done. You say, yeah, yeah.
And this seems so cute because, of course, who's else?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no need to kind of interpose a divine being. We can if we want, but there's no need for it. It's just stuff is happening. Stuff is happening. We think we're doing it. These flowers are flowering.
On the street, it's so like it's like meeting myself. It's like I see so many different people and so many different stories and expressions and this own story and expression, and it seems it's like a big act. It's like a cinema. It's like a movie.
Yeah.
And the actor is the same person or the same whatever. taking all these different roles.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy and it's kind of lovely. Yeah, it's the divine madness. Yeah. Yeah. I was saying yesterday, I would guess that the most common traditional metaphor for talking about this is dreams. Is the nighttime dream, the waking dream now and the nighttime dream. I have no doubt at all that if the cinema had been invented 7,000 years ago, in other words, if the sages of the Vedas and the Upanishads had had the cinema, then the cinema would probably have been at least as equally popular as dream. It's a brilliant metaphor for this as well. The reason we don't find it in the Upanishads is because they had a certain lack of knowledge of the cinema. But it's a very, very good metaphor. Yeah, because like the nighttime dream, you sit in the audience, you watch what's on screen, it seems so convincing. It's so utterly convincing. There are characters, there are personalities, there's motive, there's action, there's emotion, there's feelings, and so forth, all going on. And all of it, of course, has no reality, and yet it does have a reality. You can't say it's unreal. If it was unreal, there'd be nothing happening on the screen. But clearly, it's not real either. And if you go up to the screen and push your nose against the screen, you can see it is just a two-dimensional play of light. All that three-dimensionality, all that agony, all that ecstasy. It's a two-dimensional play of light. This is what this is. This is a play of light. This is the play of light. It's a wonderful metaphor. I once in a talk years ago as a kind of test as to, I don't know whether the people in the room were awake or not. Do you know Casablanca, a very famous film? Casablanca with Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman, right? And Ingrid Bergman fails to turn up for the last train out of Paris, yeah? And Rick has to go off alone to Casablanca where he drowns his sorrows in the bar. Okay, and the question was, on a scale of 0 to 10, right, at the moment that Rick realises that Ingrid Bergman is not going to turn up and he has to get onto that train, how much emotional pain was he in on a scale of 0 to 10?
0.
Thank you. You've just sabotaged the entire question, but in another way, you've seen the point. I mean, I asked this a few years ago, and people were saying, 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10. I mean, you think how heartbroken he looked as he got on. Do you remember that last glance he gives at the ticket barrier as he gets on the train? I do. I remember that. Just heartbroken, 8.5 out of 10. It's a ridiculous question. I mean, you've got it, but in a way the answer isn't even 0, is it? It's a ridiculous question. There is no Rick. There is no... I can't remember what Ingrid Bergman's character was called. Can anyone remember? There is no Rick. There is no leaving Paris on the last train to Casablanca. There's no bar in Casablanca. It's a ridiculous question. And yet... it doesn't seem ridiculous to us if we've seen the film. It seems so real. It seems so real. That is a very, very, very good metaphor for this. It's just as good a metaphor as the nighttime dream. We are so much luckier than the sages of the Upanishads because we have the cinema to refer to. And I've been given the signal that it's time for tea and biscuits now.